into the Grenfell fire that killed 72 people in June 27 actually concludes today with closing statements.
5 years ago. Can you believe it? Well, over 300,000 documents have been disclosed. 1,500 witness statements have been given in all of this. It has been a monumental task. Our national reporter, Eddie Costello, is in Kensington. This is, even just going through the details, looking at the conclusions of all of this, is just going to take so long, Ellie, because it's been such a huge task.
Yes, good morning to you, Stephen, and good morning to you, Isabel. This has indeed been a mammoth task. It's taken 5 years. There's been thousands of hours of cross-examination. 320,000 documents have been disclosed, and it's cost the taxpayer £150 million. But finally this week, starting today, we're going to hear the closing statements from the lawyers in phase 2 of the inquiry into the Grenfell Tower disaster. Now, this inquiry was set up in August 2017, 2 months after that blaze that killed 72 people. Phase 1 focused on the events of the night, and that report was published in October 2019. Phase 2, which was what we're in now, which has been delayed because of COVID, it's focusing on the causes of that fire. And just briefly to give you a recap of what we found so far in this inquiry is that the failings were widespread, that several companies knew that the cladding surrounding Grenfell Tower was flammable. This was in email chains throughout the companies. The government also missed lessons from previous tragedies. There'd been a blaze 8 years before Grenfell, which was also in a block of flats surrounded by flammable cladding, and 6 people died. And finally, the emergency response. There was failings of communication and training in the fire service. All of these things led to the death of those 72 people. There was, of course, also that controversial stay put order telling residents to stay in their flats. Now, there are still buildings up and down the country that are covered in unsafe cladding, and the government says 94% of them have started remedial works, but there are still buildings that remain unsafe. And Paul Afshar, who's with me now, lives in one of those unsafe buildings. So, Paul, when were you told that you were living in an unsafe flat surrounded by flammable cladding?
I first found out that my flat was affected by cladding in December 2 years ago. It ruined Christmas. It's made life incredibly anxious, and to be quite frank, me and my partner have had to put our lives on hold.
And what impact has this had on you personally? Because this has been years of distress for you, hasn't it?
It is. It's sleepless nights, to be honest. It's sleepless nights. It's everything gets put on hold. The flat itself is unsellable. No mortgage company will offer a mortgage on it, and no one will want to buy it until it's made safe. Life stops.
Are you going to have remedial work done on the cladding? Have you been told anything by your developer?
We have been communicated that work will be done. And this is, of course, part of the government's commitment that no leaseholder should have to pay, and it's going to be developers who have to pay to have work done to make flats safe. The problem with my flat, as with so many tens of thousands up and down the country, is that many developers are dragging their feet. There's no money actually on the table to start the works, and so we're left in this horrible limbo, this sort of dangerous purgatory where, our flats are unsafe, we can't sell them, and work hasn't started.
And Paul, you're going to be watching the closing statements of the inquiry very closely this week. What do you want to hear?
I think there are 2 really important things. Number one, as you said, there are still over 100 buildings up and down the UK with dangerous Grenfell-style cladding. That's ACM cladding. That means they're incredibly high risk, and they need to be sorted out immediately. Number 2, it's great to have Michael Gove back in seat. He was, of course, the person who engineered developers having to pay that policy. But I think he's missed a trick. What I really want to see is developers being brought to the table with their wallets, putting their money where their mouth is. And if they don't, then they should be denied public sector contracts.
Well, Paul, really good to speak to you this morning. Thank you for joining us on GB News. Let's just have a quick word from Southern Housing Group, who are the developers of Paul's flat. They say they have an ongoing programme in place to check the building buildings to carry out any work required to keep it up to date with government guidance. But they said due to the limited number of people who can carry out this work and for the high demand for this work, it will take some time before they have completed all of the works on these buildings. So for people like Paul, hundreds of people up and down the country that are still living in unsafe buildings, and for the families of the victims of the Grenfell Tower disaster, they this week will be looking for answers after what has been a really traumatic 5 years.